Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another Goosebumps talk type of video, and the subject is going to be the top 5 most popular modern Goosebumps books. Now, for something this daunting to cover, some people might disagree with this list I have compiled, but hear me out. I've been trying to pinpoint this particular list for some time. I've put a lot of research and discussion out there with people on Discord, Reddit, people I know in real life, gathering intel from people's videos out there on YouTube or Goodreads discussions, whatever the case may be, to make this list. And really, I have actually 7, more than 5, because I do have 2 honorable mentions that I really think are just as popular as my top 5, but I have specific reasons why I've left the 2 off my official 5. But we'll get into that in just a little bit. So in case you don't know what I'm referring to when I say modern Goosebumps, I mean from the very first Horrorland book in 2008 all the way to present day. At the time of making this video, we are just about to get started on the House of Shivers series. So the modern era has been through a couple of shakeups and change-ups over the years. We had Horrorland, Arc 1 and Arc 2, an interconnecting story type of series. And then we had Hall of Horrors, which was kind of a spin-off to Horrorland. It was very short, only 6 books, but it goes back to that anthological idea. And then you have Wanted / Most Wanted, which starts with Wanted the Haunted Mask and goes through 10 mainline Most Wanted books and 4 special editions. And then you have Slappy World, which is 19 books plus the special edition Slappy Beware, right? So there's a lot to cover here, a lot of ground. And like I said before, if you disagree, leave down in the comment section what are the more popular books that you've come to know from your circles or from people that you've talked with. I want to hear what you have to say. So I guess we'll start off with the honorable mentions. And my first honorable mention goes to a book that I think is very popular. Now, I want to stress this as my criteria for how I base this list. There's 3 factions of the Goosebumps community. You have the casuals, you have the fans, and then you have the reviewers / critics. All of these books tend to lean positive for the most part in at least 2 areas or more very strongly, right? And I feel with this book, it's more solid across all 3 of those criterias, right? And it can honestly be in my top 5. That's why I think this is more of a top 7, really. But there's just a factor, I think, holding it back. And it comes from the Most Wanted series, and it's A Nightmare on Clown Street. Now, like I said, this book is super popular with the casuals and the fans of the modern books. But in the reviewer circles / the critic circles, it's kind of all over the place. Mostly in that middle to high middle leaning good. And I think what kind of holds it back, right, is the fact that it comes from the Most Wanted series. Which, if you ask majority of fans out there, it seems to be that Most Wanted is the least popular series in all of Goosebumps history. Maybe next to Triple Header, which that series only had 2 books and is more obscure than it is bad, I would say. But I guess this comes from the age of the movies, right? And I feel like a lot of kids that maybe jumped on the 2015 movie and saw Murder the Clown as one of the characters in that film. If you don't know, there's 2 Murder the Clowns. It's not just this one. There's one in a story called When the Ghost Dog Howls from Horrorland. And I'm not too sure of which one it's supposed to be. I feel like Spongy444 has answered that question for me in the past, and I always forget. But that's besides the point. Murder the Clown was one of the monsters, and this book came out right around that same time, and people just loved it. I don't know, and it just seems like whenever I talk to people about it, they lean more nostalgia love than actually talking about the book's plot or the characters. They tend to like the villain, but then, you have discussions where people are kind of debating whether, he's a villain or not, and then it gets kind of all over the place. So it doesn't seem as popular or consistently popular as other moderns. So that's why I put it in as an honorable mention, but it does get brought up a lot in the fandom as one of the best moderns. So there's that. In the second book I want to mention in the honorable mentions, some people might be like, yo, this actually should be on the list. But kind of a similar thought is why I put it here in the honorable mentions. And it's the very first Horrorland book, Return or Revenge of the Living Dummy, I should say. Revenge of the Living Dummy seems to have a lot of nostalgia based around its mythology in the fandom. The casuals and the fans, especially the group of people that started with modern Goosebumps books in the beginning of Horrorland, hold this in high regard as their first Goosebumps book. And that's fair to an extent. And I think that in a lot of ways, I can totally understand if you would say that Revenge of the Living Dummy is one of the all-time, best modern books, or at least most prolific, because it birthed the Horrorland series, which was, I guess, the most ambitious Goosebumps series ever. And it started off, what became that series, and it got Goosebumps back on the map to be where it is today. Without Revenge of the Living Dummy and Arc 1 Horrorland, there might not be a modern Goosebumps. Who knows? So I can understand that. I can understand the nostalgia. I can understand the hype it must have been associated with it around the time. You had the Goosebumps Horrorland PS2 and Wii game coming out. I think it was also on DS. You had, Haunting Hour, the movie coming out around this time, and then a few years later you get the spin-off show on the Hub Network. So kids horror was kind of entering a new heyday, and I guess it kind of represents that era for people. However, while it's popular on the casuals and the fan circuit, it is not popular in the reviewer circuit whatsoever. This book gets critically slammed a lot more than it does get praised by the reviewers and critics. And it's mostly for the main story. I'm not talking about the secondary story that kicks off Arc 1 Horrorland, which seems to be, at least where people tend to differ on opinions with the book, is probably the best part of it. I've never read it personally, so I couldn't really, attest to that. But I'm just speaking on the main story here. It gets beat up. And I'll just leave it at that. There's no need to go into specifics as to why it gets beat up. It just doesn't seem to be as universal as the other 5. Okay? So, without further ado, let's get into the top 5 most popular books from the modern era. Okay? And my number 5, I did not think that this book would actually make the list. I thought for sure it was going to be A Nightmare on Cloud Street. But through conversations I've had with multiple people, like IRL, with just casual fans, people on Discord, seeing reviews of this book on the internet, there are some, you can say this for every book, there are some really negative opinions about this book, which is fine. Goosebumps is a subjective series. It's all taste-based at the end of the day, is what you like or don't like. There are people out there saying that they don't like this book, and that's perfectly fair. But I do see a lot more people bringing this up. When they talk about moderns, they say, oh, this one was a really fun one. This is one of my favorites. And I constantly hear that for some reason. And it comes from an Arc 2 Horrorland book. It's Heads You Lose. Now, to quote one of my IRL friends, Aaron, who I actually work with, and he also likes to read the books casually, one of my first conversations I ever talked with him about Goosebumps, when I told him that I had a Goosebumps channel and everything, he told me that Head You Lose was his favorite modern book. And that kind of opened my eyes and attention to the discussion of it. And over, the course of the past 2 or 3 years, I see more and more people coming around on this book and hearing discussions from, a few people in the community, kind of pulling from those. A lot of people tend to praise this one for it being an adventurous Goosebumps book. Adventure is not really a theme you get in modern Goosebumps whatsoever. And I want to quote G King out there, who comments on some videos. He commented one time saying that Head You Lose and Five Masks of Dr. Scream really bring that old school adventure flair that the original 62 had with some books, and that's why these two, in his opinion, were more popular. Now, I don't think G. King, when he contributed to the community questionnaire, mentioned this book, but I have seen him in the past kind of say that Head You Lose and Five Masked Doctor Scream itch that scratch in the moderns that just most don't bring, right? And after reading it myself, I could kind of see a lot of things that people would praise about it. You have, the Arc 2 Horrorland setup with, going to Chiller's house within Horrorland. The setup is really cool. The characters have some weird quirks that kind of borrow tropes from Night of the Living Dummy books and brings them into a medieval time traveling book. There's elements from older original 62 books kind of blended together, like A Night in Terror Tower and Headless Ghost, and you get more of an old school mashup kind of story in the moderns here, and it does have some pretty neat gore to it. And I think the most praise I think people give it is that scavenger hunt feel, kind of similarly to the Five Masked Doctor Scream. You can make the argument for both books. There's a scavenger hunt element, there's an adventure element that just gravitates people to it. So, I can understand it. And I've read it before and I can attest it. I really enjoyed the book. So, that's why it makes the list. I definitely see the discussion out there. It seems to be popular, and I'm glad people love it. Now, my number 4, this warms my heart. A lot of you in the community post expressed a lot of love for this book. And this one was always in consideration because ever since I read this book years ago and reviewed it on the channel, I've really opened my eyes to discussion over this book. And it seems like a lot of people sing the songs and praises of this book. The most common thing you'll hear is, this is one of the most refreshing moderns you can come across. And I definitely agree. Honestly, taking out the best label out of the equation, if I'm just going off some of my favorite books I've read in the series, this is definitely one of them. And of the whole franchise. And it's from the Hall of Horror series. It's called Don't Scream. I have seen people beat Don't Scream over the head on YouTube. There are a couple of reviewers, or I guess Goosebumps YouTubers, that have kind of trashed this book. But majority of people sing the songs and praises of it. And it's like I said, it's more about the concept and the freshness of the idea. There's subtext and layers in the book that people really dig. They think it's one of the more deeper commentaries that R.L. Stine brings to Goosebumps. They like Emmy, the main villain. She's crazy and probably one of the best Goosebumps villains ever. That just sells people on the story, and what the main character goes through is very harrowing. This is a commonly discussed one when people bring up modern Goosebumps. Don't Scream always gets brought up in some way, shape, or form in that discussion. It's just a very fresh idea. It does kind of mirror some tropes from the Night of the Living Dummy books, and I think that's why people are naturally gravitated to it. But it also feels a little more darker in tone to more neoclassical Goosebumps books from the Series 2000 era. And I think when you're talking about modern Goosebumps and trying to feel like older Goosebumps at the same time, this book kind of itches both scratches for people. I get why it's popular. I love it. Seems like a lot of you love it out there. And yeah, go Don't Scream. I've been championing this forever. If the TV show went the anthological route, this would have been a shoo-in episode they should have done. And I kind of hope that if they go into further seasons, they might try to dip their toes into modern books. This would be a great one to do. So, yeah, Don't Scream is number 4. But the top 3, or I think the permanent top 3, these are the 3 that reviewers, casuals, and just fans all seem to love. Okay? And at number 3, it's a slap-your-world book, so it's from the most recent ended modern series, and it's book number 8, The Dummy Meets the Mummy. I heard a lot of hype before I read this book, and this is one of the few times where the hype actually makes sense to me. I'm not the contrarian type. I'm not like the type to kind of put down popular things. I don't like to be like that. But this is like one of the genuine times where I encountered a modern book that's insanely popular that I actually, think that it deserves all the praise it gets. This is pretty much a fight book. And why people love it so much and why people gravitate towards it is that it's not trying. I mean, it does have its typical dummy tropes that you'll see in the Night of the Living Dummy books in the veins of this. It is the modern slappy. So if you're used to that older slappy with, he can't be turned off with the Karu Mari spell, that does not apply in modern slappy books generally. He can be turned off with the spell. And I guess, minus those mild irritations that I see a lot of people bring up when they do discuss the book, this one just gets majorly praise. They like Ergotis the Mummy. They like how Slappy's utilized in the story. They think that there are some fun moments, dealing with the build up to the story and how it all plays out. They like the setting being in a museum. They think it's a little more ambitious of Stein to attempt with the Slappy character. I've seen some people say that this is probably the second most ambitious Slappy book next to Slappy's Nightmare from Series 2000. And that's fair, I guess, if you want to talk about breaking the formula a little bit. But yeah, Dummy Meets the Mummy. Super popular book. And I totally get why, especially on the casuals and fan basis. Having a fight-themed book is something that I dreamed of as a kid. I've always wanted to see Goosebumps characters duke it out in a book. And given that this is like one of the only examples, minus maybe some handful of GYG books you'll get that, this has just been a book that people have used as a template to say, hey, why can't we get the Masked Mutant versus Dr. Maniac? Why can't we get a crossover book with this character and this character? Or, why can't we get the Haunted Mask versus Slappy now? Or something like that, This is the template for that. Super popular for all the right reasons, I think. And, yeah, a lot of you said that Dummy Meets the Mummy was one of your favorite ones. And in the Discord, on Reddit, and on the YouTube comments. So, yeah, worthy put here. Now, this number 2, I think is easily the most agreed upon. Probably, if I did a fan poll of the community and I said, hey, rate this book, each individual modern book from 1 to 5, right? I think this one would probably score the highest if I got a pool of 100 random people. And that's just consistency I've seen across the board for the love and appraisal from this book, from the casuals, fans, and critics. And it's also from Slappy World, and it was the book right before The Dummy Meets the Mummy. And it's alive. This book is insanely popular with the modern fans. Even old school fans who grew up reading the original 62 and Series 2000, a lot of folks have read this book and said, hey, this feels like Golden Era R.L. Stine. This feels like this could be put in that lineup of the original 62. It would fit in there in some ways. Maybe not all the way. I think there might be a few little modern twangs in there. But people love Francine the Robot, the villain of the book. They, I guess reviewers kind of nitpick it for it being a little too formulaic, going with the stay out of the basement formula. But historically, Stein has used that formula repeatedly throughout many series of Goosebumps. I think he used the formula in every series at least once, minus maybe Horrorland / Hall of Horrors. Which is saying a lot. I mean, the Stay Out of the Basement formula is, that was the second book in the whole franchise, and that one seems to be one of the more fan-revered ones in the whole franchise. So this being kind of similar in plot, makes it accessible, right? Makes it accessible for casual readers. But this is more, in my opinion, I'm just going to get into my opinion. I think that a lot of the times with the Stay Out of the Basement formula, Stein is able to bring something different to it and kind of improve on it. And this one, I think, is my favorite of the Basement formula books, bar none. And a lot of people, I don't think people have given it that high, these days, but a few years ago, a lot of people were saying that this is pretty much a perfect book. And still these days, people are saying that this is still an A-tier modern, like one of the few A-tier or maybe even B-tier at the lowest moderns out there. And it just has so much positivity. I have never seen a single person actually bash this book. Now, that could be different. Some people might be like, hey man, I'm in the comment section now bashing the book. That's fine. But yeah, this one is just widely popular. So, there you go. But not as popular as number one. Number one is easily, hands down, the most popular modern Goosebumps book. Whether you want to agree with that or not, this one seems to be the one that people constantly bring up. I've actually seen somebody make a blog post about the one modern that you should actually read. I wish I could find it. It was on Reddit or something. And it had a lot of comments, and I just remember, like, wow, this book has just hit kind of a notoriety. But it seems to be a popular one. Now, there are some fans. It seems like more so, inversely this time, the critics and reviewers love this book, but the fans are kind of divided a little bit, and the casuals seem to enjoy it just fine. So it seems to be like this one is like, the critics think it's one of the better books, but the fans are just not having it. But nonetheless, it goes to The Scream of the Haunted Mask from Horrorland. Now, this is another one of those Arc 1 Horrorland books. It does have the, typical setup in the front with the 100 pages, 100, maybe less or more given the specific book. And then you have the Arc 1 side story in the back of the book. This one seems to be popular not only on the main story, but the secondary arc as well. And a lot of people praise this book for bringing back Carly Beth into the limelight, making her the main character again, and revisiting her in whatever fashion that Stein wanted to do. Now, in this book, it does retcon the events of Haunted Mask 2, and I think that's kind of the delineation point with fans who love Haunted Mask 2, for example. They'll be mad at this book for kind of doing away with the continuity at the end of Haunted Mask 1 and kind of writing Haunted Mask 2 out of existence. They don't like that Stein chose to do that. So, it's more so, I'm a fan of something, so I'm going to be mad because they disrespected it kind of thing. But judging on its own merit, by itself, it seems to be, I think, easily the most, praised solo book of the whole modern era. A lot of people seem to really gravitate towards the direction they went with Carly Beth and her becoming more, I guess, damaged from the events of the first book, as opposed to Haunted Mask 2, where she grew stronger. So it's more of a different take of her character. It provides a different flavor to it. There's more mythology associated with the mask. They kind of shake up the origin a little bit, make it a little interesting. I do have my problems with it personally, but I can totally see why people gravitate to this one, and I can totally see why this is the most popular book in the modern era, because Haunted Mask, in my opinion, easily is the most popular original 62 book. It's the highest rated one. You can argue that if you want, but it's easily the most, universally spoken best original 62 book, and probably one of, if not the most iconic Goosebumps book of all time. So getting a sequel to that with the main character from that book, it's kind of like a no-brainer at this point. But yeah, Scream of the Haunted Mask is the most popular modern Goosebumps book. So that's the list. Those are the top 5 plus a few honorable mentions of the modern era of Goosebumps. Let me know down in the comment section, what are your top 5 from the modern era of Goosebumps? Which ones do you think actually belong on this list? Which ones do you think I missed? Do you agree? Do you not agree with this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.